I didn't hear it the first time. Not clearly, at least. My ears don't work as well as they used to. Not since the stroke. But that wasn't the reason. It wasn't the words that were muffled. It was the meaning. It was too sharp, too sudden. Like a splinter to the skin, you don't register the pain until it moves deeper. But the words were there. I heard them. Or maybe I felt them, more than anything. She's not my mom anymore. That's what he said. To the nurse. In a room I was lying in a bed I couldn't leave, in a body I barely recognized anymore. He didn't whisper. He didn't hide it. He said it casually, like someone describing the weather or pointing out a stranger on the street. She's not my mom anymore. I blinked. It was the only part of me I could still control, that slow flicker of eyelids. Everything else was frozen. My legs were dead weight, my hands curled inwards like dying leaves. My voice had disappeared weeks ago, stolen by the clot in my brain and the silence that followed. But my mind was still intact. Tired, yes. Sluggish, maybe, but intact. I remembered everything, especially that voice, especially that sentence. They say when you get old, people start talking around you, about you, over you, like you're not there, like you're furniture. But I wasn't furniture. I was still here. I was still her. Still Mom. Still the woman who wiped his nose, his knees, his tears. The one who worked 3 jobs when his father walked out and never came back. The one who taught him to write his name, who held him in the dark when the nightmares wouldn't stop. I was her. But not anymore, I guess. The nurse didn't reply at first. I don't blame her. What could she have said? Oh, okay. I see. There's no handbook for that, for when a son disowns his mother in the middle of her hospital stay. Maybe she thought I didn't hear. Maybe she thought I didn't understand. She kept scribbling on her clipboard like nothing had been said. But I heard. Oh God, I heard. It settled in my bones like cold water. It pulled in my chest, pressing down, like the weight of an entire life collapsing inwards. I closed my eyes and wished, foolishly, that I hadn't been awake for that moment. I used to think the worst pain in the world was childbirth, or maybe losing your spouse. I was wrong. The worst pain is being alive and being erased anyway. He stood there a while longer. I could feel the movement of his shoes near the end of the bed, the quiet shuffling, the tap of his fingers on his phone. He didn't speak to me. He didn't say my name. He didn't hold my hand. There was a time he would have cried to see me with tubes and wires, a time he would have buried his face in my shoulder and begged me to come home. Now he stood 2 feet away and told the nurse I was nobody. I wanted to scream, not out loud, not even in anger. I wanted to scream inside of myself, like a voice locked in a box. Do you remember me? Do you remember the woman who used to sing to you when you had fevers? Do you remember the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for your school play? Do you remember the time you said you wanted to marry me when you were 5 because I made the best pancakes? Do you remember? Of course he remembered. Somewhere in him, it was there, buried under ambition, under stress, under time and space, and that terrible thing that happens to people when they get older and forget where they came from. I didn't die, but something in him did, the part that saw me, the part that called me Mom. He left after 10 minutes, didn't say goodbye, didn't even look back. I stared at the ceiling, white tiles, fluorescent light, buzzing like a headache that never ends. And I thought, so this is how it happens. Not with a scream, not with a betrayal or a slammed door or a fight in the rain, no. Sometimes a mother loses her son with just 6 words. She's not my mom anymore. This is my story, and maybe yours too. If you're old enough, quiet enough, forgotten enough, maybe you'll recognize parts of it. Maybe you've felt the silence. Maybe you've heard that sentence, not always spoken, but felt. If you have, then sit with me. Let me tell you the rest. I still remember the day he was born. I was 21. Scared, alone. The nurse handed him to me, this tiny, wrinkled, red-faced miracle, and everything around me disappeared. The pain, the noise, the fluorescent lights. It all blurred and faded until there was only him. He was so small, his fingers curled around mine like he already knew me, like he had been waiting to return to me somehow, through lifetimes I never lived. And I remember thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I know I will, because he was mine. I named him Matthew, not after anyone, not from a book or a movie. I just liked the way it sounded, gentle, kind, like someone who'd grow up to be good, someone who'd never forget where he came from. I whispered it to him that first night in the hospital, over and over. Matthew, Matthew, my Matthew. He looked at me, barely able to open his eyes, and I could swear he understood. I made him a promise that night. I told him I would never leave. I told him I would protect him with my life. I told him I would be enough, even if it was just me. Those first few months were hard. No husband, no savings, no help. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The walls were thin. The heater didn't work. I had to sleep on the couch with him on my chest because I didn't have a crib yet. But we made it work. I learned to live on less, to sleep in 2-hour shifts, to smile when I was exhausted, to stretch a can of soup across 3 meals, because he needed me, because when he cried, he reached for me. And when he laughed, that gummy baby giggle, the whole world lit up. I've never known joy like that since. He grew fast, too fast. One day he was cooing at the ceiling fan, and the next he was taking his first steps between the worn couch and the old TV stand. He said "Mama" when he was 10 months old. Not by accident, not babbling, not half-formed. He looked me in the eyes, touched my chin with his tiny hand, and said it like it was the only word that mattered. And in that moment, it was. I cried. I didn't even try to stop it. I scooped him up and kissed every part of his face until he squealed and pushed me away. "You're mine," I whispered. "No matter what, you're mine." We didn't have much. I couldn't afford toys from the fancy catalogues. Most of his clothes were hand-me-downs from neighbours. His first Christmas gift was a stuffed rabbit I bought from a thrift store for $2. But he never complained. When he was 5, I bought him a box of crayons and a pad of blank paper. He sat for hours drawing what he called our world, just me and him and a crooked little house, and a sun with a smiling face. He drew that same picture for years. I kept the best one in a shoebox under my bed. I found it again recently, folded and yellowed with time, edges crinkled. On the back, in messy block letters, it said "Vit, Mom, me home." God, that broke me. I worked long hours back then, morning shift at the diner, evenings cleaning offices. I missed PTA meetings. I missed birthdays sometimes. I missed sleep. But I never missed what mattered. I never missed tucking him in. No matter how tired I was, no matter how sore my feet were, I came home, crawled into his tiny bed, and wrapped my arms around him. He'd whisper, "You smell like French fries," and giggle. I'd say, "That's because I'm delicious." And he'd laugh like it was the best joke in the world. He made everything worth it. Every blister, every eviction notice, every time I had to pretend everything was okay when I wanted to scream. He made me softer. He made me stronger. He made me whole. I think that's what hurts the most now. Not the silence, not the indifference, not the fact that he hasn't called me Mom in years. What hurts is remembering who he used to be. That boy with the paper son and the crooked smile. That boy who used to sleep with his hand in mine. That boy who once, when asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, said, "I want to be your son forever. I think if I could go back to any moment, it wouldn't be the big ones. Not his first day of school, not his graduation, not even his birth. I'd go back to a Tuesday afternoon when he was 6. He'd had a bad dream at school and came home early. He crawled into my lap, buried his face in my chest and whispered, 'Mommy, don't let the scary stuff get me.' I held him for an hour. Didn't say a word. Just held him. And in that moment, I was enough. That's all I ever wanted to be. But I guess time changes people. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just peels back the parts you thought were real and shows you what was always waiting underneath. And maybe he doesn't remember those days. Maybe he's buried them beneath mortgages and deadlines and whatever his wife thinks of me. But I remember. I remember every moment. I remember the days I first held him. And I will remember them until the day my hands stop working and my mind shuts off and there is nothing left but the echo of a name I haven't heard in years. Mom. People said it was brave. They said things like, "You're so strong doing it all on your own. I don't know how you manage without a man in the house." They meant well, I think. But what they didn't understand was that I wasn't trying to be brave. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just trying to survive, trying to keep the lights on, trying to keep food in the fridge, trying to keep Matthew warm in the winter and safe from the world outside our door. Bravery had nothing to do with it. Necessity did. He left when Matthew was 2. There was no big fight, no broken plates, no yelling in the kitchen like in the movies. He just stopped coming home. At first it was one night, then 2, then a week, then a voicemail that said, "You'll be better off without me." He wasn't wrong, but that didn't make it easier. I didn't tell Matthew the truth, not then. He was too little, too trusting. So I told him his daddy had to go work somewhere far away, that he loved him, that he'd be back one day. Matthew believed me. He'd draw pictures of airplanes and talk to the moon at night like it could carry messages. "Come home soon, Daddy," he'd whisper from his bed. And I'd sit outside his room, crying into my sleeve, trying not to make a sound. We moved after that. The rent was too high, the memories too loud. We found a small apartment on the edge of town, just 2 rooms, creaky floors, and a rusted mailbox that never closed right. But it was ours. And every night when I locked the door and checked the windows twice, I'd look at my son and whisper, "We're safe." Because safety, more than luxury, was what I could give him. I worked 3 jobs, morning shift at the bakery, evening shift at the gas station, and late nights folding laundry at the hotel on 9th and Maple. Sometimes I'd come home so tired my hands would shake holding the key. I'd find Matthew asleep on the couch, a blanket half draped over him, a plate of crackers waiting for me on the table with a note. "I saved you the good ones." That boy, he had no idea how much he saved me. The house may have been without a husband, but it was never without love. We made our own holidays. On Valentine's Day, I bought him a chocolate bar and wrote, "To the best boy in the world, love, Mum." On Father's Day, he drew a picture of me with a crown and wrote, "You're my everything." And on the nights when the silence in the apartment felt too heavy, we made up songs. Terrible, silly little songs that rhymed peanut butter with undercover. We laughed. God, we laughed so much. It wasn't always joyful, but it was real, and real was enough. Still, there were moments I felt it. The missing piece, the cold side of the bed, the decisions I had to make alone. When he got sick and I didn't know if I could afford the prescription. When the car broke down and the landlord raised the rent. When the neighbour called me the poor widow, not knowing I was never really a widow at all. I carried it all in silence because I didn't want Matthew to feel the weight. One night he came home from school with a bruised lip and said a boy had called him fatherless. That word hit me like a slap. I asked him if he wanted me to talk to the school. He shook his head and said, "No, Mom." I told him I do have a parent, and she's tougher than both of yours combined. I laughed then. I cried later. Because children shouldn't have to be brave. Sometimes I wondered if I was doing it right, if I was being too hard, too soft, too tired, too everything. But every time I doubted myself, Matthew would say something so gentle, so thoughtful, that I'd feel like maybe I hadn't ruined him after all. You always come home. You smell like work and love. You make the cold go away. Those words stitched holes I didn't know I had. We didn't have a man in the house, no deep voice at the dinner table, no strong arms to carry groceries, no one to kill the bugs or fix the faucet or say, "Don't talk to your mother like that." But we had something else. We had late-night pancakes and hide and seek in the dark and whispered secrets under shared blankets. We had a bond that felt unbreakable. I held it all together for so long. The bills, the tears, the birthdays, the fear, the faith. I didn't want pity. I didn't need applause. All I wanted was for my son to grow up and say, "She never gave up on me." But now I wonder if I gave him too much, if I made myself so invisible in service of his comfort that he stopped seeing me at all, if the love I gave became so quiet, so seamless, that it turned into background noise. Easy to tune out. I don't regret staying. I don't regret sacrificing. I only regret that one day, in that very same house, the one I built with empty pockets and full arms, he stood in the hallway and looked through me, like I was a guest, like I didn't belong anymore. That was the first time he called it his house. Mom, in my house, we don't do that. I remember standing in the kitchen holding a sponge, my knuckles raw, the floor still damp from where I'd cleaned up after his daughter. And he told me his house had rules now, rules I didn't understand. But before that, before the silences and the stares and the edits to the family group chat, we were a team, just a mother and her son, in a house without a husband, but never without heart. It didn't happen all at once. No slamming doors, no screaming matches, no declaration of resentment. It was quiet, subtle, like watching a thread unravel slowly, invisibly, until one day the whole sweater falls apart and you don't remember the moment it started. That's what it was like, losing him. The first time I noticed, it was small. He came home from high school and she went straight to his room. No hug, no hi mom, no mention of his day, just the click of his door. I stood there holding his favourite sandwich, tuna, no mayo, extra pickles, and stared at the spot where he used to drop his backpack and talk about math class like it was a war zone. He's just tired, I told myself. Teenagers change. They get moody, they get quiet, they get distant. But Matthew had never been distant from me. Not once. Not even when he had the flu and didn't want anyone near him. He'd still hold my hand under the covers. Then came the phone, the way he clutched it, guarded it, laughed into it, with people I didn't know, at jokes I didn't hear. He stopped showing me his drawings, stopped asking me to read the stories he wrote in the margins of his notebooks, stopped inviting me into his world. And I tried not to take it personally. I told myself it was normal, healthy even. Boys need to become men. They need space, autonomy. But it wasn't just space. It was detachment, a slow erosion of connection, and every time I tried to pull him closer, he pulled just slightly away. At dinner, he started eating faster, finishing before me, washing his own plate and disappearing before we even talked about our days. When I asked how school was, he shrugged. When I asked who he was texting, he said, "No one." When I asked if he wanted to watch a movie like we used to, he said, "I've seen it already," without looking up. Little things, tiny things. But they piled up, like pebbles in your shoe, not dangerous, not unbearable, but slowly, surely, they wear you down. Then one day, he didn't come home right after school. No call, no message. I waited at the window for hours, my chest tightening with each passing car that wasn't his friend's. When he finally walked in, it was dark outside. He said he'd gone to the mall with friends. He forgot to text. I wanted to be angry, but all I said was, "I was worried." And he rolled his eyes. He rolled his eyes. That simple movement felt like a slap. I was worried. And he rolled his eyes. I started watching him more after that. Not to invade, not to control, but because I was afraid. Afraid of how fast he was changing. Afraid of the way he stopped calling me Mama and started saying Ma. Afraid of how often he sighed when I asked him to help set the table. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't rude. Just gone. Still there in body, but gone in spirit. He began to walk differently, speak differently. Even his handwriting changed. I saw it on a birthday card he gave me, the last one he ever wrote by hand. It said, "Happy birthday, Ma. Thanks for everything." No hearts, no doodles, no inside jokes. Just, thanks. It felt like a message from a stranger. When he turned 16, he got his first job at a grocery store. I was proud, so proud. But when I asked if he wanted me to drive him, he said, "I'll figure it out." When I offered to pack his lunch, he said, "I'll grab something." When I stayed up late to ask how his shift went, he said, "It was fine," and walked away. He was building a life, and I was no longer part of it. I remember sitting alone in the kitchen one night, the clock ticking louder than usual, his untouched dinner going cold on the table. I whispered out loud, "He's slipping," like trying to hold water in cupped hands. No matter how tight you hold, it finds a way through. I used to know everything about him. His favourite colour, green. His biggest fear, bees. The way he liked his toast, light brown, never burnt. The way he cried when he lost a race but still clapped for the winner. But now, I didn't even know the name of his best friend, or what music he listened to, or the last time he laughed without a screen in front of his face. I didn't know what he dreamed about anymore, or if he still dreamed at all. Maybe that's when I started shrinking. Not physically, though that came later, but emotionally. I tiptoed more. I asked fewer questions. I made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. I called it love. I told myself it was what mothers do, but inside I was screaming, "Don't go, don't leave me behind, not like this." But I never said it out loud. I didn't want to push him further, so I said nothing. And in the silence, he slipped away. The first time he lied to me, it wasn't about anything big. It wasn't drugs or money or skipping school. It was about a math test. He told me he got a B+. He smiled, dropped his backpack by the door, opened the fridge, and asked if there were any leftovers from the night before. I remember feeling proud, not about the grade necessarily, but about how relaxed he seemed, about how he still told me things. That night, while folding laundry, I found the real test in his jeans pocket. It was a D, a red shaky D, circled twice by a tired teacher's pen. And something broke, not because of the grade, but because he hadn't trusted me with the truth. I sat with that paper for hours. It wasn't the mark that bothered me. Lord knows I failed my share of tests. Life never gave me passing grades either. What hurt was that he looked me in the eyes and chose the lie. The next morning I didn't confront him. I made breakfast, packed his lunch, kissed his forehead. And I told myself it was a fluke. He must have been embarrassed, or scared, or distracted. But deep down I knew it was the beginning, the first crack in a glass that had always felt whole. I started paying more attention after that, and the cracks grew. He told me he was at the library, but I saw photos later on his friend's social media, a bowling alley. A girl I didn't recognize leaning into his shoulder. He told me he forgot to charge his phone, but his battery was full when he came home, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking slightly. He told me he didn't need help, but his bank statement said otherwise. Overdraft fees, fast food every other night, gas station charges in neighborhoods I'd warned him about. One day I asked him directly, "Are you okay, Matthew?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at his cereal, spoon moving in slow, nervous circles. "Yeah, why wouldn't I be?" I wanted to say, "Because I'm your mother. Because I see things even when you don't say them. Because I know when you're folding in on yourself." But I didn't. Because I already knew he wouldn't hear it. It's strange the way lies build. Not like bricks, heavy and obvious, but like fog. A little each day, thin, almost invisible, until one morning you wake up and you can't see the road anymore. You can't remember which way was home. He began to smile less, not the real smile, the crooked one that lit up his face when he was little. Now it was tight, polite, defensive. I once said, "I miss your old laugh," and he said, "I grew out of it." As if laughter had an expiration date, as if childhood had to be erased to become someone. He grew taller, his voice deepened, his shoes lined up at the door like those of a stranger. But the biggest change wasn't physical, it was the silence. The way he answered in single words, the way he took longer showers, stayed in his room longer, started locking his bedroom door. He used to fall asleep on the couch next to me. Now, he turned the volume up when I passed the hallway. Now, he flinched, subtly, but enough, when I tried to brush lint off his shoulder. The house felt different, colder, quieter, hollow in ways I couldn't name. I kept the same routines, cooked the same meals, left the porch light on, kept his favourite blanket on the couch, but the boy who once wrapped himself in it now avoided eye contact with me across the dinner table. I told myself, he's becoming independent. That's what parenting is, right? Letting go. But it didn't feel like letting go. It felt like being shut out, like a door quietly closing, without ever having been slammed. I remember once, he had just come back from work. I asked him, "How was it?" He said, "Fine." And then he added, "You don't have to ask every time, you know." He didn't yell. He didn't snap. He just said it. With that edge, that coldness that doesn't belong to a son speaking to his mother. And that night when he went to bed, I stood outside his door for almost 10 minutes. I didn't knock. I didn't say goodnight. I just stood there, hand on the frame, listening to the silence. And I cried like I hadn't since he was born. That's when I realized something else. Lying doesn't always sound like a lie. Sometimes it sounds like a shrug, a half smile, a polite nod, a phone not answered, a hug not returned. Sometimes lying is just pretending everything's fine when it clearly isn't. And he was getting very good at pretending. There was one last time I asked him something important. He was 19. I said, "Do you still feel close to me?" He looked confused. He said, "I mean, yeah, I guess. Why?" And that, I guess, crushed me more than any D on any test ever could. Because once upon a time, it wouldn't have been, I guess. It would have been, of course, Mom, always. But that boy, the one who said that, was gone. And the man standing before me now? He lied, not just to me, but to himself. And maybe I lied too, by pretending I was fine with being slowly erased, by smiling through the ache, by telling people we were still close. But lies, no matter how small, change things. And the first one, that was the beginning of the undoing. I never used to notice the chair. It had always been there, in every hospital room, clinic, waiting area. A simple plastic thing, hard-backed and always too cold. A place where families sat while you recovered, where hands were held, where smiles, nervous or hopeful, met yours across IV stands and heart monitors. But now, it was all I could see. The visitor's chair. Empty. I stared at it for hours. It never moved, never creaked, never shifted with the weight of someone sitting down, because no one ever did. The nurses were kind, too kind sometimes. That kind of rehearsed warmth you give someone who clearly doesn't have anyone else. They asked questions like, "Is anyone coming today? Do you want us to call someone? Do you have any family nearby?" And I always answered the same way, a pause, a smile. "He's busy. He works a lot." That was my line. The fiction I repeated so often, it became muscle memory. He's busy. Not, he doesn't call back. He hasn't visited in months. He didn't answer when they admitted me. He hasn't sent a single card on my birthday in 3 years. The first time I was admitted for chest pain, I spent 2 nights in the hospital. Matthew didn't show up. I left him 3 voicemails, texted him once, no reply. 2 days later he responded, "Sorry, was slammed at work. All good now?" No punctuation, no love you, no do you need anything, just all good now? I lied. I said yes. I said I was fine. I said I went home and rested. He didn't ask anything more, and I didn't offer anything more. That was the beginning of a new phase, the absence disguised as distance. I started noticing the other patients, women my age with daughters who brought them flowers, men with grandsons who asked them to play checkers at the foot of the bed, laughter in the hallways, whispered stories, Tupperware lunches delivered with care, the smell of home, following someone else in, never me. My birthday came during my 3rd stay. I didn't expect balloons. I didn't expect cake. But I expected something, a message, a call, "Hey, old lady, made it another year." But the only one who said happy birthday was the nurse on the morning shift. She brought me an extra pudding cup, and for a moment I wanted to cry, not because she remembered, but because she was the only one who did. Later that afternoon I stared at the visitor's chair again. I imagined him there, Matthew, legs crossed, phone in hand, that half-bored, half-distracted expression he wore so well. I imagined him saying, "Hey, Ma." I imagined myself smiling, even weakly, just to feel seen. But the chair didn't change. The air around it stayed still. Sometimes I left the curtain open just in case he showed up without warning, just in case I could hear his voice before the door opened, just in case someone mistook me for someone worth visiting. But each time the door creaked, it was never him, never even close. One night, a nurse asked gently, "Do you want me to move the chair out of the way?" I smiled and said, "No, leave it. Someone might still come." She hesitated, then nodded, but her eyes said what her mouth didn't. "No one's coming, you're not waiting, you're hoping." And maybe that was worse, because hoping is cruel when it has nowhere to go. At night I started whispering out loud, not prayers, not regrets, just thoughts, memories. "You used to fall asleep holding my finger. You once cried when I didn't pick you up first after school. You promised you'd build me a little house in your backyard when you became rich. I whispered these things into the air, as if the chair would carry them to wherever he was, as if furniture could remember love better than people. Time passed slowly. The clock ticked louder in these rooms. Nurses changed shifts. Patients came and went. But the chair stayed, always facing me, always empty. I began to imagine it differently, not as a place waiting for him, but as a reminder that I was now alone in ways I hadn't prepared for, that you can give someone your entire life, and they can still walk away without looking back. That motherhood doesn't guarantee memory, or reciprocity, or even presence, and yet I couldn't stop hoping. I still glanced at the door every time it opened, still listened for footsteps heavier than a nurse's, still dreamed that maybe, on some random Tuesday, he'd remember me, show up, say my name like it still mattered. But that hope, it started to ache, like a wound that doesn't heal, but also refuses to bleed. Just there, quiet, constant. I once asked a nurse, a young one, full of bright energy, if she had children. She said, "Not yet." I told her, "Make sure they know where your chair is." She laughed. She didn't understand. Not yet. And so the chair remained, like a monument, to love unreturned, to stories untold, to silence unbroken, to a mother, waiting. There is a kind of betrayal that doesn't require shouting. No slammed doors, no angry words, just quiet paperwork and forged initials. It began with a phone call, a polite woman from the bank. She introduced herself, used my full name, and confirmed my date of birth. Her voice was practiced, the kind you hear when someone is about to say something that should come as good news, but doesn't. "Just calling to confirm the authorization on your account updates." I blinked. "What updates?" A pause. Faint typing. "Power of attorney changes, and the updated beneficiary structure for your primary account ending in 1904. It was submitted last week, signed and notarized." I felt something in my stomach shift. Not pain exactly, displacement, as if the floor beneath me had moved and I hadn't followed. "I didn't sign anything," I said. She paused again, longer this time. "Oh, I see." Suddenly her voice changed, less cheerful, more careful. "Would you like me to flag the file for a compliance review?" "Yes," I said. "Please do." That night I stared at the ceiling for hours. I knew who had done it. I didn't need to see the signature, didn't need to hold the document. Only one person had access to my documents. Only one person knew the answers to every security question. Only one person had enough of my trust to make it easy, Matthew. The next day I asked him, calmly, gently, "Did you sign something for me?" He didn't lie. He didn't even hesitate. "Yeah, I took care of some paperwork. You're not really in a position to manage that stuff anymore." Just like that. No apology, no guilt, not even an acknowledgement that what he'd done was wrong. "I did it for your protection, Mom." That word, protection, stung more than I expected, because that's what I used to say to him when he was small and afraid of the dark. When I'd close the closet door and say, "Nothing can hurt you while I'm here." Now he was using it to justify taking away my autonomy. I asked him for details. He told me he'd been granted full financial control, that he'd updated the will just in case, that the house was now under his name, so it's easier when things happen. When things happen. As if I were a walking expiration date. As if my body had already given notice and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. I asked him why he hadn't told me. He said, "You wouldn't have understood." 4 words, each one heavier than the last. You wouldn't have understood, as if my mind had already left the building, as if my opinion, my consent, no longer mattered. That night I opened the drawer where I kept my personal papers. The folder was gone. Birth certificate, deed, the original will I drafted after my mother died. Gone. Replaced by copies, reprints, clean, crisp pages with someone else's fingerprints on them. Mine had been wiped away. I found the new will eventually. He'd left a draft in his briefcase, which he forgot to take one morning. It was efficient, clinical. My possessions divided like inventory. My wishes reduced to legal jargon. No mention of the letters I'd saved. The photos I wanted buried with me. The music I wanted played at my funeral. And at the bottom, in careful, unfamiliar handwriting, was my name. My name. Signed. But not by me. I stared at it for a long time. Not in shock, but in recognition. This wasn't just paperwork. It was erasure. And the worst part? He didn't even think I'd notice. I tried to tell someone, a lawyer. She listened kindly, nodded in all the right places, but her voice faltered when she said, "Do you have proof the signature isn't yours?" I looked down at my hands. The arthritis had taken so much. My handwriting had become a ghost of itself. Even I barely recognized it. "No," I said. "I don't." I could have fought, maybe, but I was tired. Tired in a way that goes deeper than the bones. Tired in the soul. So instead, I went quiet. I let the chair stay empty. I let the papers stay filed. And I let go of the illusion that love alone could protect me. You spend your whole life teaching your child to trust you, to believe that you will never hurt them, that you will never abandon them, but no one teaches a mother what to do when that trust is not returned, when the child becomes the one who says, "It's better this way." Better for whom? In the months that followed, I watched my world become smaller. I stopped asking questions, stopped offering opinions, stopped insisting on being involved. He paid the bills. He signed the checks. He talked to doctors on my behalf. And I disappeared in plain sight. There's a special kind of grief in watching someone you raised make decisions about you instead of with you. To realize that your life, your rights, your wishes are now items on someone else's to-do list. Power of attorney, asset transfer, living will, DNR. They sound so clean, so organized, but they feel like sharp, quiet, legal. He signed my name, without me, and maybe in some twisted way that made sense, because by then I was no longer me to him. I was a task, a file, a responsibility to be minimized, a name on paper. But I remember who I am, even if he doesn't, even if the bank doesn't, even if the lawyer doesn't, even if the world no longer asks. I am the woman who raised him, who never signed away her love, and never gave him permission to stop seeing me as a person. It was a Tuesday. Funny how the worst things don't happen on dramatic days. Not holidays, not anniversaries, just Tuesdays. The kind of day when no one's paying attention. When the sky is the colour of dishwater and the news is dull and nothing feels particularly important. That's when it happened. I had a fall. Not a terrible one, just a slip on the kitchen tile. The mop handle knocked the kettle over, and the whole thing made a mess loud enough for the neighbour downstairs to hear. An ambulance was called. At the hospital, they checked my vitals, scanned my bones, and wheeled me into a curtained room to wait. And that's when he arrived. Matthew. He looked tired, slightly annoyed if I'm being honest. His shirt was half tucked, phone in hand, tapping through emails with one finger. He said hi. Not even hi, Mom, just hi. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't touch my hand. He looked over at the nurse who was adjusting my IV and said, "She does this. She falls sometimes. Don't worry." She. I didn't register it at first. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe my mind, still fogged from painkillers and pride, tried to brush it aside. But then the nurse asked, "Are you her son?" And he replied, "Yeah, I handle her stuff." Her stuff. As if I were a houseplant or a messy inheritance. It kept going. Her memory's not great. She doesn't really manage her own affairs anymore. She tends to make a fuss over nothing. He said these things while I lay there, eyes open, heart beating, hearing every word. Not once did he say my mom. Not once did he say my name. Not once did he turn toward me. I could have been anyone. Any elderly woman with a wristband and a file number. To the nurse, I was a patient. To him, I was a burden. It's strange the things your mind clings to in a moment like that. For me, it was the word her. So ordinary, so casual. But when spoken by your child, the one who once called you mama with sticky hands and big eyes, it becomes a blade, not sharp, but deep. I wanted to speak, to interrupt, to say, "I'm right here. I can hear you. I'm not her. I'm your mother." But the words didn't come. My throat was dry, my tongue useless. Or maybe it wasn't my body that failed. Maybe it was my heart. Because something in me stopped trying in that moment. Something gave up. He filled out forms on my behalf. He signed boxes, asked about prescriptions, talked to the social worker about placement options. He used words like facility, management, and long-term transition. And still, not once, did he say my mom. The nurse returned later with a clipboard. She smiled kindly and said, "Your son is very efficient." I almost laughed. Efficient. Like a machine, like a system. He was handling his mother's life like a spreadsheet, clearing tabs, minimizing effort, saving time. Later that day, I was wheeled into a room with 2 chairs and a frosted window. Matthew sat across from a woman with short hair and glasses. A case manager, I think. They discussed my future as if I wasn't in the room. Every now and then she'd glance at me with soft eyes, like someone checking if the lamp in the corner still worked. Matthew never looked at me. He said, "She's not really capable of making long-term decisions. She doesn't understand the paperwork. Her needs aren't complex. She just requires supervision. Her. Not Mom, not even my mother, just her." I wanted to scream, not because I was angry, because I was disappearing, and he was helping it happen. I raised a boy who used to draw pictures of us holding hands. Now he was drawing lines between us, legally, linguistically, emotionally. I remember a moment just after the case manager stepped out, when we were alone. I turned my head slowly, painfully, and whispered, "Do you remember what you used to call me?" He glanced up from his phone. "What?" I repeated, a little louder. "What did you used to call me?" He stared at me for a second, then looked back at his screen. "I don't know. Why does it matter?" And I think that answer hurt more than anything else he'd said that day, because he wasn't just refusing to call me Mom. He didn't think it mattered anymore. When we left the hospital, he wheeled me out without a word. Not a question, not a touch, not a glance. And when the nurse handed him the aftercare instructions, she said, "Here you go, sir, for her." And he took it, nodded, pocketed the page. No correction. No, she's my mother. No, her name is Eleanor. Just silence. That was the day something died in me, not hope. Hope had already left months ago, quietly, like a tenant moving out in the night. No, What died was the illusion that I still had a place, a name, a role. I was no longer Mum. I was no longer even Eleanor. I was just her. It didn't happen in a moment of rage. There was no screaming, no slamming of doors, no broken plates, just silence, and a slow, quiet decision. I was going to leave, not because I had somewhere else to go, not because someone begged me to come stay, but because staying in that house, the one I built with my hands, my years, my grief, and my grit, had become unbearable. I used to think a house was unshakable. 4 walls, a roof, a front door that always opened to family. I had painted those walls, hammered those nails, folded laundry in that hallway while humming lullabies to a boy who used to call me Mama, with the kind of reverence children give to superheroes. But the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Not since the day I found my wedding photo in the hallway closet, not on the mantel, not in a frame, but thrown carelessly between old wires and broken chargers. Not since my tea set was packed into a plastic bin to make space for smart speakers and scented diffusers. Not since Matthew told his daughter, "That's just her old chair, you don't need to sit in it." Her, again. Every corner of that house echoed with memories I was no longer allowed to mention. I became a guest, a quiet shadow, a presence tolerated but not welcomed. I started walking softer, breathing quieter, eating faster, so I wouldn't take up too much of the table's time. And then one morning, with no particular drama, no momentous event, I woke up, looked at the ceiling and thought, I cannot die in this house. It wasn't just a thought, it was a fact. I could not take my last breath surrounded by digital calendars, stainless steel, and the constant hum of people trying to live faster, fuller, louder than I could keep up with. So I sat up, and I began to pack. I didn't own much anymore. A few clothes, a box of old letters, my mother's rosary, 3 recipe cards in my handwriting, faded but legible. I placed them gently into a tote bag and sat at the edge of the bed, the same bed I once bought secondhand, the one Matthew used to crawl into when he had nightmares. I looked at the wall, blank, clean, not a trace of my life left on it. When Matthew came home, I was in the kitchen, folding a dish towel for the last time. He looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm leaving." He blinked. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer right away. Because how do you explain to your own child that a house can be too cold to stay in, even when the thermostat says 72? How do you explain that silence can scream louder than words? How do you say, "You signed my name, you erased my place, you spoke of me like I was a burden, not your beginning"? So I just said, "I can't stay here anymore." He didn't argue, not really. He asked if I had somewhere to go. I said no. He asked if I was upset. I said no, because what I felt wasn't anger. It was release, like exhaling after years of holding your breath for someone who never asked you to. He offered to call a car. I said I'd walk. He looked embarrassed. Maybe because his daughter was watching from the stairs. Maybe because part of him knew this was a moment he would remember forever, even if he never spoke of it again. I walked out without ceremony. The front door that once squeaked with age now opened silently, thanks to a newer hinge. Outside the air was crisp, clean, for the first time in months, maybe years. I felt weightless. I didn't know where I was going. I still don't. But I knew what I was leaving behind. Not just a house, but a history that no longer had room for me. A family that outgrew its roots. A son who mistook convenience for love and silence for care. I found a bench at the edge of the park, the kind with peeling paint and initials carved by strangers. I sat, let the sun fall on my hands. The same hands that once held a baby boy against my chest while he slept, trusting, safe. And I thought, maybe this is what freedom looks like at the end of everything. Not joy, not triumph, but clarity. They say a mother's love is unconditional, and I believe that. But love doesn't mean you must stay where you're unseen. Love doesn't mean you must die quietly in a house where no one says your name. I left the house I built, and maybe I left everything with it, but at least I left with my name still my own. The park is quiet this morning. A breeze stirs the leaves overhead, and somewhere nearby, someone is walking a dog that coughs more than it barks. A sparrow hops near my shoe. The bench beneath me is cold but steady. I sit, and I think, not of the past, not in that aching, longing way I used to, but of the question that has followed me since the silence began. Am I still a mother, if no one calls me Mom? The world tells you motherhood is forever, that the title clings to you like a second skin, that once you've held a child, once you've whispered lullabies into fevered ears and stitched loose buttons at midnight, you are a mother, always. But no one tells you what happens when the child walks away, when they stop calling, when they call you her instead. Does the title stay, or does it fade, like everything else? Sometimes I feel like a tree after the birds have gone, still rooted, still tall, still full of memory and rings no one sees, but quiet, so very quiet. There are days when I question it all. Did I do enough? Was I too soft? Too invisible? Did I confuse sacrifice with silence? And then I remember the small things, how he used to rest his head on my lap while I hummed, how he once said, "You're my whole world," how he ran to me after his first fall and cried not because of the blood, but because he thought he made me sad. These things are real, they happened, they were love, once, and maybe that's all motherhood is, moments, not a lifetime, but a collection of unspoken gifts. So yes, maybe I'm still a mother, not because he remembers me, not because he calls, not because my name sits on some line of a document filed in a cabinet he barely opens, but because I remember, because I loved him in ways that changed who I was, because every scar on my body carries his name in silence. I don't need a day of the year to be thanked. I don't need flowers or grandbabies on my lap or "I'm sorry" to be muttered years too late. I just need to know that I loved without condition, that I gave everything I had, not perfectly but wholly, that once in this vast and busy world there was a little boy who felt safe in my arms, and that matters, even now, even if I sit alone on this bench, even if no one says Mom when I walk by. Sometimes I imagine I'm not alone, not truly. I think of all the other women like me, sitting on their own benches, drinking their quiet tea, holding their memories with gentle hands. We don't speak. We don't need to. We carry the same ache and the same fierce private pride. We mothered, we gave, we stayed, even when we were forgotten, especially then. So if you're listening and you've ever asked yourself that same question, am I still a mother if no one calls me Mum? Let me answer you gently. Yes, you are. You always will be.